Welcome to Life Changing with Dori Fern, a podcast about who we are, where we're going, and what connects us. It's a show for people in progress at any stage.
I didn't know what the hell I was doing, okay?
Yeah. Sounds like me as a college DJ.
I was nervous about everything, and then I was just like, nah, bring your curiosity in the room and be yourself. Like in a week time period, my whole entire life in New York changed.
Today, it's easy to find kimchis, kombuchas, and other once exotic foods in stores across America. But it was not so in 2010, when BK Swappers held its first event for ambitious food cooks to gather and trade such homemade goodies. It was 2 years after the stock market crash, and fertile ground for this community of frugal food lovers to grow. By the time BK Swappers held its last event in 2016, food swaps had proliferated across the country and had been covered by mainstream outlets like the New York Times. Today's guest, Nicole Taylor, came out of that BK Swappers community, and that's where I met her. Nicole was more of a regular than I was, though, because when it started, the swap, I was already kind of jaded about New York City's food scene. I had tried to find a place for myself in the food media world after my daughter was born in 1996. I wrote about food trends of the day and covered the early Brooklyn restaurant boom in the late 1990s and early aughts. But I couldn't see getting a full-time job in food writing since the salaries sucked and wouldn't have paid for our childcare costs. So, becoming a restaurant cook, which I also considered, that paid worse. It seemed everyone in those jobs came from money or didn't have children. I was also turned off by how blindingly white this industry was. It did not seem representative of New York City's diversity at all. And I could have looked at this as an opportunity. I know that now, but I was stuck seeing myself as an outsider with no way in. And that's a big reason why I wanted to talk with Nicole Taylor, who, despite seeing herself as an outsider too, did find her way in. And whether or not you follow the inner workings of food culture, this interview sheds light on the role timing, intuition, and sense of self play in our life paths. Here's my conversation with Nicole Taylor. So today we have Nicole Taylor on the show, and Nicole is a James Beard Award nominated food writer, home cook, producer, and author of the very wonderful Watermelon and Redbirds, a cookbook for Juneteenth and Black celebrations, which is the first cookbook from a major publisher to celebrate the holiday. In addition to her previous cookbooks, the Up South Cookbook and the Last OG Cookbook, Nicole has written for Resy, Foodprint, Bon Appetit, the New York Times, and Food and Wine. She has been featured in the LA Times, Today, Wall Street Journal, NBC News, Washington Post, NPR, and on BET. And the Today Show, I should say. Brooklyn Magazine named Nicole to its list of 100 influential people in Brooklyn culture, which is right and a big part of what I want to talk to you about. So I feel like I have this parallel relationship to you and your influentialness, Nicole Taylor. So welcome to the show today.
Oh my gosh, it's great to talk to you. Yeah, it's I feel like there are very few people who get me from the very beginning of me moving in this crazy city in New York. So I'm happy to talk to you today.
And the funny thing is, I don't think we met very many times. I'm pretty sure it was at BK Swappers around, 2010, 2011, not long after you got here from Atlanta. BK Swappers laid the foundation for today's diverse foodie culture, reaching well beyond its Brooklyn origins. Maybe that's one good byproduct of gentrification, that cultures and foodways can converge, connect, and regenerate into meaningful new communities.
Yeah, it's so crazy. I moved here in 2008, and now when I reverse back and I'm talking to you, we literally were at the ground floor of a whole movement that rippled in small towns and big cities all throughout America, really all throughout the world, but definitely all throughout America, of food and community merging and entrepreneurship and small businesses and all of that. It's crazy to think how many people I connected with through BK Swappers. But this is also the same time that I got like totally immersed in food culture in New York and taught myself like, what are the best restaurants in New York? Who are the food writers? Who's Ruth Reichel? Who is Adam Rappaport? Who is Jessica Harris? What are their books? Reading all their articles. I didn't have an iPhone then. I had a paper MTA map. I would like print out my Yahoo directions before I left home. It was a time where I felt so energetic, so curious, so untainted. A time where the possibilities of who I could be and who I was becoming were endless.
No matter how smart or skilled someone is, great achievements often start with a feeling, intuition, and blind leaps. There's magic in trusting the unknown and having faith that what you don't yet know, you'll figure out. And such was the case for Nicole, who in 2009 started an interview podcast called Hot Grease that ran until 2013. In our talk, Nicole name-checks her interview with Brooklyn Flea co-founder Eric Demby, but it's worth noting that Demby also co-founded Smorgasburg, the giant outdoor food and drink market showcasing Brooklyn's indie food scene that now has locations in LA and Miami. Smorgasburg started in 2011, just 1 year after BK Swappers.
So I'm thinking about the fact, and I was saying it to you before we went on air, that I did not know that you had, for all these years, you were ahead of the curve with podcasting. You had a podcast for Heritage Radio Network called Hot Grease that you did for quite a while.
You know, what's so funny is when I moved to New York, I worked for New Yorkers for Parks. I literally had an intuition about Heritage because I took a sick day from New Yorkers for Parks that day because I'm like, okay, I like this job, but they're not making me full time. I'm like, I gotta figure out what to do. And so I used to get Ann Saxelby's newsletter from Saxelby Cheesemongers. Rest in peace, Ann Saxelby. And I was like, wow, she has this podcast. I was listening to podcasts. Like I was listening to like News and Notes with Farad Shadea and definitely KCRW. So I understood what a podcast was, you know? And so I saw that Ann was hosting one on Heritage Radio Network, which is a podcasting studio in the back of Roberta's.
Roberta's, for anyone listening who doesn't know, is a
hipster pizza spot.
Well, hipster pizza spot.
Air quotes, because I don't even think they're hipster anymore, right? Like me, right? I used to be like the black hipster. I'm like, anyway. So Spirit told me, pick up the phone and call Heritage. I picked up the phone and I was like, hey, I want to pitch a show idea about what's happening in the Brooklyn food scene right now. I want to focus on primarily Black and brown voices, but more so I just want to, bring some different flavor and talk to people who are doing cool stuff in the food scene. They were like, okay, can you come in such and such date? And the rest is history. Literally, that's the day that my food media career took off. I have a photo of me sitting with Jack Inslee at the back of Roberta's talking about what my show would be. And my husband, I brought him along with me, and he took that photo. And that is literally what I like to say, that's the date that food media took off for me. And that was all on gut. Like in 24 hours, like in a week time period, my whole entire life in New York changed.
What can you tell me about podcasting from your experience? What did you learn?
I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Okay.
Yeah. Sounds like me as a college DJ. That was my experience. There were fun looking album covers. I was a blues radio DJ.
No, I didn't know what I was doing. I remember Jack Inslee told me, he was like, just be yourself. He was like, you know how Wendy Williams is herself? He was like, yeah, bring that in. He's like, you just need to be yourself.
There you go.
I used to be so nervous. I was nervous about my voice. I was nervous about my grammar. I was nervous about everything. And then I was just like, no, just bring your curiosity in the room and be yourself. Right. And then, so many of those episodes, 160 plus episodes. I think I had producer credits on of like a few specials and things that they hosted there. They still hold up. I mean, I had Karen Washington on like way before like she became a national figure on Community Gardens. Michael Twitty, Fanny Gearson, like when Doe was just starting. I mean, now she owns Fan Donor. I listen, I forget. I had Brooklyn Flea guys on.
Eric Demby.
Yep, had Eric Demby on it. You name it. Jane Lanier, Pacor. I forgot about Pacor was on there. Kathy Irway had a show after me.
Yep.
Kathy was on there. You name it. People from the South, people in New York. It holds up. I was talking about Juneteenth way before people were talking about Juneteenth.
Nicole's Hot Grease podcast opened many doors. It led to book deals and an executive editor role at Thrillist, and becoming a contributor at outlets including the New York Times. But despite this mainstream success, Nicole still sees herself as an outsider in the food world she helped to shape.
So I've always at the core of everything I do is activism. Like, I have a degree in community health education. So that work was always work that I knew I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. So being this person now that's kind of evolved into being in the mix of the machine is not a natural thing for me, right? It's not natural for me to have a business manager and my business manager saying to me, oh, you cannot do this event for zero money. You need to ask them for $5,000. I'm like, what? I like, that's just not, and I'm like, but oh my gosh, I love this organization.
How do you feel about that?
I feel two things. I feel our responsibility to my family. I have a 5-year-old son who I don't want him to have a ton of student loans like I had. I want to be able to, help him and support him if he decides he wants to be an entrepreneur, or if he decides to purchase his first house at 25 and I can help him with the down payment. So I want him to have an easier life in terms of being a young adult. So that helps me to be like, okay, yeah, sure. I need to take this $5,000. I got to up my rates, so that is a thing that over the last 3 months, I've had to say out loud, I'm worth this.
So in other words, that makes sense to you. How would it feel to just say, I am worth this for me?
Sure. I'm getting around to that, right? Okay. Well, that's so funny because I'm updating my website and my husband was like, your bio is just so short and you really don't talk about all the things that you've done. So I literally a few days ago was digging through my Google Docs and I found some articles about Brooklyn Zine Fest. And we talk about this indie kind of fringe culture that I've always been a part of. And I'm now realizing like, yeah, girl, you've always kind of been on the outskirts.
We all tell stories about ourselves like they're absolute facts. My story is that I don't exactly fit anywhere. In my family, my friend groups, my career, in my marriage. Like I'm a visitor who travels through my circles rather than a resident who lives there, if that makes any sense. Like for most of us, I've come to understand that much about this narrative stems from my childhood. But what felt like a deep truth for little Dori frankly helps 58-year-old me not at all. I'm happy to say that through therapy and coaching and practice, I've made a lot of progress naming it, noticing it, and letting it go. Which is all to say that while I identify with Nicole's feeling of outsiderness, I also wanted to understand more about where it comes from and how true is it.
I really think that is something that has always attracted me to you because I've heard you say this a lot about feeling like an outsider.
Yeah.
It's a narrative that there were approaches that you made that you didn't have models for necessarily around you. But I have noticed personally that my feeling like an outsider is not necessarily a fact of outsiderness. It's something that I bring sometimes as a wall around myself.
Ah.
And so your response to that question was assuming that the outside world sees you as an outsider. And I'm not so sure in the food business that people do.
People make an assumption a lot of times that I'm just one note, right? Like all I know is about, Southern food. But like I'm a serious food restaurant person. Like I can tell you about Adila. I can tell you about their tripe.
People who love tripe love that tripe.
Exactly. I can tell you about iconic Brooklyn restaurants. I'm not new to this. Like I've done the work, and I've done the work in a way that people who know me know. But I really didn't start making money that was respectable in food until 2019.
What's something that happened in your childhood that you think of from time to time that you think is like, this is me. This is the thing that made me.
I had a mentor, and I wouldn't call her teacher. She ran a program at our high school. Her name is Beverly Johnson. I think Dr. Beverly Johnson now. She was a Black woman from Athens, had gone away to college, came back, and she was running, it was called Jobs for Georgia Graduates. So it was teaching teenagers and people in high school like how to prepare for post high school world, like how to write a resume. Like it was a bunch of different stuff, and we had a really cool bond. And one of the things she told me early on, she's like, there's something about you that's really special, and if you remember this, you are going to go far because it's what makes you you. And she said, you don't do what everybody else does. You're your own person. You dress differently, you think differently, you're reading differently. And she was like, that's your superpower. A lot of my friends would like tease me like, oh, you crazy, you're doing this, or why are you interested in this? Or I was wearing Birkenstocks like back in high school, and nobody in my friend group was wearing Birkenstocks. And I remember people saying, you got the Jesus shoes on. And Miss Johnson, she gave me permission and said, no, you don't follow the crowd. That's what's going to push you to another level. And I had to be, 17, maybe 18 years old. I remember that one thing. That changed my entire life.
One thing I realized that I don't know about you, and that I listened to quite a lot of old podcast episodes of you being interviewed and interviews, and I didn't see very much about your parents, what they did. Who are your parents? And do you have siblings? Don't know any of this about you.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it's funny because I've talked about my mom a little bit. My mom she'll be 70, 2 days before Juneteenth. She worked for more than 30 years at a chicken poultry processing spot in Athens, Georgia. My mom is a very stylish, funny, strong woman who life was always complicated for her, She is one of 4. And my 2 aunts and my late uncle, none of them have kids. I grew up in the house with them, a house that my grandfather left for them when he was tragically murdered. Never met him, never met my grandparents. And so Adrian and I, my husband, we joke and I say I'm the golden child because, as my aunt said, she's like, man, you saved our lives. I never knew what she meant. And now I get older, I realize so much tragedy had happened with them. And I think I came along and gave them some joy. I do understand that now. So my mom, was in Athens. My father and her, I would say, I guess I was a love child. He never lived in Athens. My family, his folks are from Athens. So I guess, he was visiting and boom, I happened. I met him 5 times in my life, like physically met him. He passed away in 2015. And then I discovered I think I always knew I had a sibling, but I have a brother and 2 sisters that I reconnected with around that time, so almost 10 years ago. I have a sister and aunts that live in Philly and a brother who's incarcerated, life sentence. Crazily, we communicate a lot. And so he was closest to my dad. My father lived in Chicago most of his life. Very stylish man, very cultured man, with a lot of kids that probably didn't have the best relationships with. So, yeah.
Your brother who's incarcerated, what's his name?
His name is Jarrell.
Jarrell. What does your relationship with Jarrell give you? Like, what does it bring to your life?
It brings a sense of wonder and curiosity because he is the person who grew up closest, physically closest to our father, right? It's funny because he'll send me a book and say, I'm reading 1619. And I'm like, oh, Nicole Hannah-Jones. I was like, oh, she lives in my neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because to communicate with someone that's incarcerated, it can be very laborious, right? Because you have to, it's hard to be like, I've had a rough 3 months.
Right.
To a person that's incarcerated, right?
Have you met him in person?
Never met in person. Mm-hmm. So we email. They have an email system. So yeah, we talk. He is going through there's kind of what do you want to call it? Rehab university program. Very structured with a university that's in Chicago. I forget the name of it. So they have a website. He sent me stuff on it, and so I get to see their syllabus of what they're reading. So that's always very interesting because he's well read and knows what's happening in the world, and who has the ability to Google what I'm doing out here. And I think he's very interested in like, wow, okay, so you write about food and understanding what that means. So no, it's interesting to communicate with someone who has spent pretty much over half of their lives incarcerated.
How old is he?
He is a year older than me. So he's 47. Yeah.
We recorded this episode prior to Juneteenth, and my plan was to have this live before the holiday so I could promote Nicole's wonderful Watermelon and Redbirds cookbook for Juneteenth and Black celebrations. All of Nicole is here in this 2022 book, the proud Black Southerner who calls Athens, Georgia home, the frugal Brooklyn transplant who swaps her homesteading know-how so you too can have a larder full of syrups and sauces, spice mixes and pickles at the ready. And here too is the maybe outsider who writes in her inimitably, untraditionally authentic way that makes everyone feel welcome and invited to the table. It was Nicole who urged me to trust my gut and take my time readying this new season and staying true to my vision for it. So even though Juneteenth is past, it's still summer celebration season, and I still think you should know about this groundbreaking cookbook. Note, Nicole's audio gave us trouble on this part, but stick with it.
I was reading your incredible book, Watermelon and Redbirds, cookbook for Juneteenth and Black celebrations. And I have to tell you, and I am not just blowing smoke up your skirt. I love this book, and I expected a good cookbook. It wasn't that. I knew it was going to be good, and I was interested to read it. But I connected to it in so many levels. So on one hand, I absolutely see Nicole Taylor, the Southern Black woman who is like going to bring you Juneteenth and its traditions and elements of Black celebrations writ large into this book. And you did that, and you did an amazing job at that. And I've heard you talk about the Black struggle into Black joy. And I felt that. And I felt you as somebody who came to New York and who experienced the food world and this person that is a bit of an outsider. I felt that too. And you know what I was left with at the end of it? A sense that I have when I go to see a really amazing museum exhibit where you're seeing things, but it is not so much each of the individual things, great though they might be. It's the way they are bigger than the sum of their parts. And what I was left with was like, this is freedom. This is freedom. Like I felt that so deeply from that book, you know, I'm getting choked up. And then just on like a really basic level, amazing recipes that I am absolutely going to make. So,
well, that means a lot coming from you because they're very, and literally I told Adrian the other day, I was like, yeah, there are very few people that I let come into the kitchen with me when I'm cooking. I have to say, you're at my house for brunch, and literally, like, people who know me, like, only a few people get to come in and make something.
I'm honored.
I'll kind of let you load the dishwasher up, but even with that, it's like, oh my gosh. This person
You don't want me loading up your dishwasher. I'm actually terrible at that.
But that means a lot coming from you because man, it's this wasn't just, oh my gosh, let's create some recipes. It's beautiful. There are so many twists and turns in the production of this book, in the writing of this book. I took a lot of care. It was super important for me to do all the things that you said, right? I wanted to create something, if no one ever cooked one recipe, that they could read it from front to back and you got all those feels, right?
So what are you doing now? Like, what's going on for you? What can you talk about? I know you always have things going on.
Hopefully I'll have a big announcement soon. I've been, figuring out how to tell the story of home and how one can create homes no matter where they are. And, how I did it when I left New York for 2 years and went back home, which is a physical place, but how do you recreate that no matter where you are? The feeling, what does home look like for someone? What does it feel like? Who's at the table? What's the food you're serving? So that's what the next cookbook is going to be about. And I'm excited because, some people wanted to say it's an entertaining book. I'm like, no. The more I keep getting these clues and listening to like, what is this next book? It's becoming crystal clear what it's about. It's a cookbook, but it's about like how one defines home and who's at the table.
It's been said that the only thing that remains of us when we're gone is stories. We are our stories. What do you hope your story will be?
I want my story to be about generosity. And how I was generous to people and a helper to people around me in ways that transform the both of us. That's what I want my story to be, not the cookbook, not even my son, I want it to be about my generosity. That is, if I can have that as a legacy, woof, yeah.
I'm with you. I am with you. Thank you, Nicole Taylor. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I love that talk. We went so deep. I learned so much about her, and I love her even more now. This episode of Life Changing with Dori Fern was produced and edited by the great Ann Pope. Ann was also, as it happens, a producer on Nicole's Hot Grease podcast. And no, I did not know that when I met Ann, which happened after I recorded this interview, and which explains why, because I was producing it then. The sound goes in and out at parts. Ann would have never let that happen. Anyway, music is Cool Jazzy Bass and Vibraphone and Orange Blues by M33 Project. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another life-changing conversation. Thank you so much for listening.